Hello once again. It's time for another reading of a classic short story on Vintage Tales of Literature, your weekly series that welcomes a prominent actor of our times, coming to you live from the Camera Americana studios to bring you a story from the great literature of America.
I was so happy. For the first time in my life, I had the opportunity to just live stress-free out in the middle of nowhere, with none of the rat race of the city. A place I could escape to whenever I wanted some precious time to myself. It was a sunny autumn afternoon when I moved into my new home, a charming old house tucked away in the countryside. It was an old 2-story house, surely over 100 years old. There were all kinds of fruit trees on the property and a small brook near the house where I could go and sit on quiet afternoons. Everywhere I looked reminded me of an oil painting from one of the masters of the 19th century, a very picturesque place. And the house was on an abandoned property that I bought for a good price. It even came partly furnished. I looked forward to the solitude and mystery of living there. Little did I know that this house held secrets that would unravel my sanity and plunge me into a world of terror.
Tonight's Vintage Tales of Literature stars Agnes Grayson reading an original short story by Paul Holbrook called Old Pictures Never Die.
The house was secluded in the country, a rural area known for its old farms and woods. I could walk around my property and not see any other houses or buildings in any direction. I didn't even want anybody to know where I had moved, so no uninvited visitors would drop by at times when I didn't want company, which I expected would be all the time. But I still had some friends help me move some of my furniture in and get me settled. I was so happy to be there. I wanted to spend a few days exploring its rooms and attic and trying to imagine what living there must have been like at one time. I didn't bother unpacking right away and just adapted to the slower, quieter lifestyle I had always hoped to find someday after living in the city so long. Every day I was more delighted than the last. When I first heard about the property, I was aware that things had been left behind by the previous owners, and I thought that they were worthless old items that I could just move aside or replace, but I loved everything I found. Outdated furniture, definitely vintage, but still in good shape. Dinnerware with painted plates that were from a different period, but still beautiful enough to display. There were even a few coats and shoes in the closets. These things all connected me to the past so well I began to feel more at home there than I had anywhere else. I imagine I was smiling to myself more than I had in years. I felt a special kind of wealth, a richness of things that promise a life of peace and serenity more than money itself. I knew a family had one lived there, but I knew nothing about them, although I wanted to. You can understand then how excited I was to discover a dusty box concealed in the attic's shadows. Intrigued, I opened it and found a treasure trove of aged photographs and home movies. Their sepia-toned hues hinted at a forgotten past, and I knew this would be what would introduce me to the people who had lived here. But as my eyes scanned the images, a creeping unease settled within me, intensifying with each haunting gaze captured on film. These weren't what I expected to find. There were no images of happy families or scenes of happy lives. They showed grotesque people engaged in peculiar ceremonies. What anybody had been trying to capture in them, I could not understand. Driven by equal parts curiosity and trepidation, I dusted off the old movie projector and carefully threaded the first movie onto the take-up reel. I darkened the room, and the trembling beam of light unveiled the image on the wall. The image was at first blurred and jittery, but the focus slowly improved. I gasped, my breath stolen by the terrifying sight before me. The film had been shot in the very room I was in, but it was distorted, an eerie reflection of reality. It had to be the same room, but there was a haze in the air, and the camera filming the scene was held by an unsteady hand. The walls were dripping with what looked like blood, while the floorboards seemed to contort with agony. The air around me grew heavy, as if the malevolence within the image seeped into the room, filling it with an otherworldly presence. I looked about me, and the room was darker, and a rancid, putrid odor filled the air. I turned off the projector at once and sat in the dim light, trembling. What in the world had happened in my house? What was I seeing? I got up and left the room and went outside to sit on the porch and catch my breath and wonder about what I had seen. It took me over an hour, but I calmed down and concluded that the film must have been a prank. Maybe an amateur horror film someone had filmed for Halloween. And that eerie fogginess that appeared in the room as I watched the film, I decided it was nothing more than a malfunction of the old projector. Maybe it was filled with dust, and the heat of operating it had caused the dust to become airborne and fill the room with that horrible smell. That was the only rational explanation. It was all the work of some horror film fan who had turned the room into a vision of hell as a test of his ability to make a film like the ones out of Hollywood. Although I was still shaken, I thought wherever he was now, he'd be pleased to know his little film had achieved its purpose. Gradually, I found time to go back into the attic a few days later and saw the films and photographs where I had left them. Knowing what to expect now, I started examining them again. I was still uneasy looking at them, but my determination remained as strong as ever. I forced myself to study them. Their content was pretty sick, but I was sure they told a story of some things that had actually happened there. Some showed what appeared to be adults cloaked in hooded robes performing black art ceremonies, the burial of a body in an unmarked grave behind the old barn, and people wearing blindfolds and tied up with wire being kept in the smokehouse. Some photos showed the walls with murals of scenes of witchcraft and occult symbols on the floor. I removed sheets of wallpaper and rugs and found them still there. Whatever had happened here was no amateur prankster's attempts at scaring people. I did nothing but study the photographs and visit the locations where they'd been taken about the farm. It led me further into the past, unveiling a chilling chronicle of the house's dark history. Each photograph exposed unspeakable horrors, a sinister presence lurking in the background, twisted and grotesque figures with faces etched in primal evil. Desperate for answers, I turned to the town's archives, determined to uncover the truth buried within the crumbling pages of forgotten newspapers. There, I discovered a long-forgotten article, a tragedy that mirrored the haunting photographs. An entire family, the very same one depicted in the images, had perished in a mass murder. It dawned on me that their souls were still in the house, and my handling and studying of the films and photos were reviving them. I put the films and photos back in their box and locked it in the attic. The presence in the house indeed grew stronger, its supernatural grasp tightening around my sanity. Whispers and knocking reverberated through the hallways, and my dreams became plagued by chilling nightmares. Every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking horror, and I could no longer ignore the spectral energy consuming my every waking moment. The spirits were slowly regaining power, and by showing and looking at them, I was the agent that was bringing them back. My energy was somehow giving them life. I didn't know when it would stop, or even if I could break the curse. I left the house and stayed in town for a few days as I tried to find help from someone. No one would listen to my story. They seemed to think I was lying or crazy, but I was still determined to break the curse. I sought the aid of a paranormal investigator by telephone in New York City. He had never heard of the family but knew what had to be done. He advised me to wear a crucifix for protection and then gather all the cursed films and photos and burn them immediately. I didn't hesitate. In a field next to the house, I prepared for the release of the haunted souls. I put the box on a big pile of wood and lit a bonfire. But as the flames licked the edges of the images, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air, and the malevolence intensified. A wind, almost like a whirlwind, rose out of the fire, and sparks climbed in a blazing red spiral high above the treetops. The spirits were refusing to be liberated. They had become one with the house, their vengeful rage forever intertwined with its decaying foundations. Despair washed over me as I realized the grave mistake I had made. The very act meant to free the tormented souls had unleashed an even greater horror. I grabbed a flaming piece of wood and threw it into the house. The flame sprang up inside immediately, and soon the whole interior of the old house was a raging inferno. I could hear growls and screams from within as the fire consumed the whole house. Neighbors and the fire department soon arrived and tried to fight the flames, but I prevented them. As the last ember faded, cracks emerged, devouring the house from within. Shadows erupted like tendrils, swallowing everything in their path. Frozen with terror, we watched my once-beloved home crumble into a nightmarish abyss. Everyone was horrified, and in a ghastly twist, a force left my body and I realized I had been almost possessed by these spirits. Collapsing to the ground, my final scream mingled with the echoes of the tormented souls, forever lost within the cursed house's twisted corridors. Its terrifying tale would remain an enigma, a cautionary legend whispered among the townsfolk, forever avoiding mention of the dark presence that claimed my sanity. I left the area that night and have no intention of ever going back. I'll donate the land to some charity to get rid of it. And then they put me in this place, where they tell me I must remain until I gain my sanity. I told you they never believed me and think I'm crazy. But I'm not crazy, not at all. And I'll tell you this, they had better not try to hold me too long. I can get out any time if I want to invoke the power that is in me. Yes, something there, very evil and very powerful. All I would have to do is summon it, and I could destroy this hospital and everybody in it. I might. It would like that. I must live to please it, or it could destroy me. Now, I'll show you something they don't know about. I'll demonstrate the power. Look closely at me. Watch me. See how my face is changing, and my body is twisting with the power. I'll show you that I'm telling the truth.
Thank you for joining us once again. Be sure to tune in next week for another classic story read by one of America's finest actors.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Boris Karloff. I'm interrupting the show just long enough to tell you that I'll be the guest on the next episode of Vintage Tales of Literature. I'll be reading a classic short story written by Guy de Maupassant. Join me then, won't you? Tune in for the story The Devil.
Thank you, Boris. Our listeners on the West Coast should stay tuned now for news from Hollywood, your weekly roundup of gossip and interviews from the film capital. Tonight, the guests are Bob Hope, Lana Turner, Hedda Hopper, and Errol Flynn.